say it every day.
Probably
We know what it means in English.
Right kindness, like the just kindness, maybe.
The just kindness. Okay, so we'll discuss a little bit what the chesed is.
Is it every time like?
All right, so as I mentioned before. So like whenever it says tov is always a little alarm should go off because tov, when it refers to God, always means perfect. Vayar Elokim Kitov. The Rambam writes about that. How that's always about being perfect. Logically speaking,
That's exactly what I'm saying.
right? So no. There's two questions. One question is right. There's two questions asked. One is why does he have to repeat every time it's perfect, right? And the second thing is how can you have a tov ma'od? Tov ma'od is something different than tov, but how could that be? Because if it's perfect, it's perfect. But whatever. But the point is for now is that we're saying gomel chasadim tovim means that somehow that whatever this idea of God bringing about chasadim to the world is tovim. And what's v'konei hakol? What does that mean?
Creates everything.
Create. So it says here. It says where does everyone say create? Rashi says konei shayim aretz. Kamo osa shayim aretz. Right. Al yedei asiyasan kanan leo shalo. So through making it, he acquired it for himself. What does that mean? Good. So Ezra's on the right track. Yeah.
Like how a creator has, how the owner has the right to do whatever he or she wants to do with a certain thing. So maybe some idea, like how he's a boreh, but he's also.
All right. So let's say you put all this stuff together because I think everybody's saying very good. So Yavud Ram says when it comes to Chesed, who quotes him here? I think it's the Eitz Yosef. He says that what does he say? He says Tovim Yoser Migamilus Chaste Adam. So his Chesed, right? This is the Tovim part. His Chesed is greater than the Chesed that's done among men. So when it says Gomel Chasadim, Zavur just said that. What would you have thought? Okay, so he's just quantitatively like he does Chesed like man, but on a higher level. But Abu Ram's telling you, no, there's something qualitatively different about his Chesed. So what's different about his Chesed? What makes God Chesed? Well, first of all, what are we talking about when we say about God's Chesed? What do we think we mean about that? Mick, you're right. You're definitely right about that. There's no question. One idea, Chesed is man's Chesed is always tainted by the selfish nature of it. He's always looking for something. Okay, but therefore, what are you saying? So therefore, God's Chesed is one that is selfless. But of course, isn't that pasha? Yeah, let's get better than that. What's so great about God's Chesed? That's the question. It's constant, meaning what?
Everything.
So that's very good. You're right. So what Tzvi is saying, I think, is very good. I think what the idea is that you see, and you were mentioning this before also. In other words, there is really no idea. There's no necessity for God to be engaged in the world, right? Whereas he could have created it and done what? Not given it to someone else, but there could have been an Aristotelian model of the universe, logically speaking. It could have been that there was a creation and the universe runs on its own. In fact, most people believe that to be the case. I think I've said this numerous times, but most people don't have trouble with God as a creator. Most people have trouble with God as engaged with mankind. That's what bothers people. God is creator, so people I don't think people really have that much of a problem with that. I would tell you the vast majority of the world.
Not Jews though.
Well, I would say I shouldn't say that because most people are religious.
I'm not saying praying, but they believe that the one who can help them is God. They say,
Well, it depends what you mean. Let's assume there's two kinds of people, right? So in that category, one is those who believe in other religions, but they have a distorted idea of God. They think their God will help them, which that's one road, like Hinduism. So Hinduism has a version of a deity, and they think their deity is invested in their welfare. But that's a corruption of the notion of our idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The other type of person believes that we have control over events, and that we're spinning along in the universe, and whatever happens.
But no.
The notion of God that we're talking about here is the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinitely removed from man, right? And there's nothing whatsoever. There's no reason why God should be involved in our existence. In fact, we're going to see this in Koheles. Koheles makes an unbelievable statement. He says it's an amazing thing that God. We see that weird things happen to people in the world, right? Sadik gets killed, Russia doesn't, etc. Right? So he says, but what's even crazier that bothers him is that he says the average person is basically a behemoth, right? If you look at the average person, what are they? They're just sophisticated animals, right? What do? They spend their lives engaged in the instinctual, right? That's it. That's their lives, right? So he says, you tell me that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Melech Malchem Lachem would in any way be engaged in judging a behemoth? Behemoths don't get judged, right? God doesn't judge a lion. A lion exists. It does its thing. It lives an instinctual life. So what kind of idea is it that God gets involved in a species that's one small step above the instinctual animal. You know? So
They have the choice.
I believe this. That was an act of chesed that God's involved in the world. There's no necessitated reason why God is engaged in our what do you call it, in our existence. There's nothing necessitates it. It's in a tremendous chesed from Kadosh Baruch Hu.
What about Norah? We already said this.
God, that the ultimate expression of chesed. You'll see the whole. In fact, by the way, just to let you know, the thematic change in this bracha is from Kel Elyon, right, to the next chunk. Gomel chasad and tovim konei hakol. Zocher chaste avos, again chesed. Umevi goel livnei v'neihem l'man shemo bi'ava. What's umevi goel livnei v'neihem? Right, and what does that partake of? Chesed. Chesed. All those things from that point on, chesed. But just think thematically, it's beautiful how Chazal wrote this. Why are you shifting now from what we said before, which is giving pure shevach to God and how God is koach to this? What? We're not ready for it yet.
Now we're seeing how it affects us.
How it affects us, correct. In other words, now you got to go from the pure recognition of God as Kel Elyon, right, which is you need to at first, to now that God's invested in our fate. All right, that's the move you make in Shemona Esrei. So it's just amazing how it's set up. And then what? Of course, what's the next step after that? After you see how God is that we recognize that God is involved and invested in our fate, then you go into Vuros Hashem, okay, which gets into specifics. All those things become more specific descriptions of God's investment in our fate. But you have to first recognize what chesed is. Chesed, the fact that God chooses to engage in man's needs, even though there's nothing that necessitates him to do that. That's considered chesed. Okay? Okay, so now what's Zocher Chaste Avos? All right? Zocher Chaste Avos. So now you got another thing, another chesed. What chesed is he talking about? Now listen, this may let you guys think about this. This is amazing. Just to think about what this idea is, all right? So Eitos of course the Torah, right? And it says, think about this, okay? It says, so they were masaking they wrote this, right? That God remembers the chesed of the Avos, okay? Eitzel HaGeula. So if you look, how's it written? Zocher Chaste Avos. And then what comes afterwards? So what are the two doing next to each other? So he says, Lomar, she'af im tama zechus avos, right? Gulaso le'olam kayemes. All right? Shaharei hiftiach ba b'shmo hagadol. The ka'asher shmo kayem le'olam u'olmei olamim, kach geulosenu le'olam kayemes. And want to take a shot at what that means? She'af im tama zechus avos. Okay? Taf memhe. Right? Gulaso, like tema. Gulaso le'olam kayemes. What does that mean?
Within the world.
Say it again.
And God did not leave it up to us to mess it up.
Okay,
It has to be.
okay. So now it's interesting. So let's. There's three levels here. Three levels. Okay. Let's talk about when Bnei Yisrael were taken out of Mitzrayim. What does it say in Shmos? Right. What happens? God hears the cry of Bnei Yisrael. And that doesn't seem to be the only motivation, lahavdil, that drives God to get involved. What else does God say? In that pasuk it says, "Va'yanchu Bnei Yisrael," that Bnei Yisrael crying out to God, and God says, "Okay, it's time to get involved." But there's one other thing He says.
You remember the bris.
The bris, okay? So it's interesting. So if I had to posit three levels, there's us meriting X, right? We do good things and God responds accordingly, right? Like kisavo, what do you call it? Brachos and kolos, right? We do good, we get God. Well, hold on. Second level is some sort of bris that previously exists, right? So meaning that God will get involved. Yeah, there's some merit there, but He also needs the assistance of the bris, whatever that means, to get involved Himself, i.e. Mitzrayim. And then you have this, which is that it's irrelevant what we do, but ultimately the Geula will take place. All right. So what's Zocher Chaste Avos then?
You remember.